Hello everyone. So we're actually going to be diving into something a little bit different here. This is going to be the first part that's solely focusing on UVs. And before we dive into anything specifically UV related, and I know we've dabbled in it in the past couple of parts, what I want to do is make sure we're all on the exact same page here. And what I want to dive into before anything else is normal maps and baking and making sure we understand why we're setting out our UVs to be the way that they're supposed to be, and all the specifics and all that kind of stuff. So I've set up a little bit of a demo here, and hopefully this does a pretty good job of illustrating why we bake things the way we do and how we set up our UVs and our hard edges the way that we do. So here are three cubes, three different examples as to how we could potentially set up our models for baking. They're all the exact same model, but they're just slightly different in how they're softened or hardened, as well as their UVs are a little bit different. So these two first guys here are the exact same cube with the exact same UVs. The only difference is the one on the left is all soft edges. So we're getting this very gnarly rendering going on here. Having a cube like this with 90-degree angles all being soft, the light is never going to be able to render off of that properly with the normal sticking out in very odd directions for a shape like this. This cube being hard edged is exactly what we'd normally have, what you'd expect for a cube to be. And like I said, this last one is a little bit different because if we look at the UVs, his UVs are all broken, but in very specific ways. So let's take a look. The first cube here, all soft edges, is a normal shell where everything's stuck together. Hard edges, all stuck together like normal. This one though, what I've done and what we typically want to be doing when we're baking UVs is have everything on a mesh soft unless there's a 90-degree angle, which a cube is all 90-degree angles, in which case on that 90-degree angle, we cut it and we make it its own separate shell. So I kind of dived into this before, but this is going to be a much better visual representation of that. So let's go and see what it looks like when we take these cubes, and on top of them we just bake these rounded cubes. These are all the exact same rounded cubes, and we're baking them onto these three different styles. So if we go into Toolbag, here are the cubes. So just so we're clear, if I just put on a default Lambert, like this is it. This is the soft cube, and hard cube with the UV separated. Let's put back on that material just to make it a bit more reflective. So the soft one is all right. The edges are turning out pretty good, pretty smooth everywhere. The weird thing though is we're getting these shading errors. As you can see, there's these dark spots popping up whenever we angle the camera too much. We're seeing it right here. We're seeing it here. This should just be, of course, just a flat surface, and it looks as if it's being like pressed down into the corner, which we definitely don't want. So having all soft edges is giving us some normal errors for sure. We could even open that up and take a look at it. If we go to the desktop, minimize all of that. I believe it is test normals. We'll give that a second to open up, and while that's doing that, we'll move on. So this is the hard edges with the UV shells together, and we got rid of that weird warping. So that's no longer there. There's no darkness or weird dip going on, but we're starting to get these pretty nasty texture seams. That's obviously a big no-go. When starting out, I kept getting these, and I never knew what the issue was or how to sort of get around it. So this is having our UVs together with both soft and hard. And Photoshop's opening. I forgot about this version. This version really lags quite a bit. But yeah, this is perfect timing actually. So the one on the left is the soft edges, and as you can see, to compensate for those soft edges, it's doing a ton of weird shading and calculating to kind of fix that up. The hard edges one is doing a much better job. You know, where it's flat on the edges where it curves off. It's adding these shaded colors to sort of simulate that. But the problem is we have no space here on these edges. It's very claustrophobic where it's a 90-degree angle. This third one though is kind of the best of both worlds, where we have a lot of this space in between everything since we cut it, but we also get this nice gradation off of it. So if we dive back into Toolbag, we can see we're not getting any weird rendering, nothing like that, and we're not getting any harsh lines on here either. So what you have to do is anytime there's a 90-degree angle, you cut your UVs on that spot and you harden that edge. Everything else is a soft edge and should be part of the same shell. So you want to be modeling kind of with that in mind. But that's how we're going to go forward with our UVs. So as another example of this, I just prepared something pretty quick here. So if we dive back into Maya, I made this guy here. So this is just showing some soft edges, some hard edges. So everything on this guy is a hard edge minus this area here. Like these guys are less than a 90-degree angle, so they're transitioning very, very smoothly. And I'm baking down this softer version where all the hard edges are kind of a little bit chilled out. It's not perfect, even in the high poly, we're getting some weird stuff, so it was very quick. But if we look at our baked version, because if I turn on wireframe, this right here is the low poly. We can see that we're getting these very smooth transitions. We're getting some very, very nice softening going on here. This is all looking good. This is a little funky, but that's probably because of my UVs or wireframe or something. But most importantly, I want to keep our eyes here where we have all these as soft edges, but there's no weird warping. And the reason there isn't any weird warping is because we're adding our hard edges wherever there's a 90-degree cutoff, which is up here, here, and the two sides. And everything that's less than 90 degrees is getting a nice softened edge. And when you sort of do that together, we get these seamless transitions between everything. And this is pretty much the exact same visual as our high poly. So it's working perfectly fine. And if I were to look at the UVs for this guy, like I said, a very botched job, but the only thing to really keep in mind is, yeah, anytime there's a 90-degree angle, we've essentially just cut it and moved it aside a little bit. But then when we have this area here, where it's less than 90 degrees, this is all one shell. It's not until we meet a 90-degree sort of turn where we decide to cut. But yeah, that pretty much sums up how we get our baking to look very nice. The only other thing to keep in mind is just our naming conventions, asset low, asset high, but right now we're just talking about baking. So as we move forward and do our UVs, we're going to be keeping all this in mind. And yeah, I will just give me a second to close out of all this stuff, but we should be able to now dive back into the typewriter and get a pretty good look at our model with a more critical eye and start UVing this a little bit more seriously, and we'll have a better idea as to how to tackle all of that. So just give me a second and I'll open up that file and I will see you guys in just a second. Okay, so we're back in front of our finished low poly, well, finished minus the UVs. So let's take a look at some of the parts that we've already done and sort of re-evaluate those. So we have these guys here, and if we take a look at them, this is another really good example. So I tried to explain this very quickly as we were going along, but like I said, a proper breakdown was needed. So all these guys, since it's less than a 90-degree angle, we're putting it on this shell here and just sort of cutting it and unfolding it. And then this bottom part, since it's sort of a 90-degree turn here, we cut it off, make it its own shell. Another thing to keep in mind is this is something I did go a bit more in depth in while we were doing this stuff, but if we were to normally unfold this, it wouldn't be this straight. I'm simply going into the align tools and using these options here to straighten all of these guys out. It's very important whenever we can, even if it's distorting things a little bit, to go through and straighten everything up for a much cleaner bake. So as I was doing my low poly and I had a couple parts where I was duplicating them around, I decided to do the UVs, and it quickly became apparent that doing all the UVs for this stuff on just one screen, sort of like this, and balancing it is going to be very difficult, especially when I have like a little toolbar here and there's more options to the side. There's a reason this kind of stuff typically uses multiple monitors. So I've decided that the majority of the UVing I'm going to be doing off of camera. That's why I wanted to do a bit more of a better breakdown. We've done a few examples already, but let's just do a couple more, and then I'm going to hand it off to you guys to sort of finish yours and take care of it. With those things in mind, it should be pretty straightforward, but let's just do a couple things just to get a better idea. So this is probably a really good example. We got a lot of round shapes. We got a lot of flat parts. This is going to be a pretty simple one to sort of break down and discuss. So let me just squish my editor in here. This toolbar will just be on the other screen, but I'm not going to use it too much. So let's keep in mind what we already know. Anytime there's a 90-degree angle, we're making a cut. So anytime this transitions from here to go down, this is a different shell, and this is a different shell. So let's just select everything that we can in one go that we know is going to be its own separate shell. So this inside part here, this part here, and this top part, we can project that all from Y. We know we can project it from Y because straight down it's going to look like so. It's a pretty generic, boring example or explanation rather, but essentially I'm just projecting it to be straight on. That's all I'm really worried about. Technically, the Z-axis will give us the exact same look. The only thing we're trying to avoid is projecting by X, because we're just going to get a very thin ring like so, and it's not going to be easy to work with because we can't actually see any of the faces. So I'm just going to project that from Y again, and we can start to break this guy down. So we're gonna have to add some cuts to this. So one thing that I should probably explain is we were cutting up the mesh, or we were cutting up the UVs every time we were adding a cut to the UV shell when we were doing our normal map. And that's really good for normal map baking. But one of the issues is anytime there's a cut, a tiling texture going across that is going to have a seam in it. We're going to have seams all over our textures wherever we cut something. So we're going to have to find a clever way to both hide that in the model itself as well as the texture. It's a bit easier to hide it these days in the texture because Painter makes that just really straightforward, but it's still good practice to hide seams like where it's the least likely for someone to see it. So most of my renders are probably going to be looking at it from here, and if it's from the back, it'll probably be above like this. So if I'm adding a seam, I want it to be near the bottom and kind of facing the back side where it's hard to see this line here. It's almost no camera angles where I'll see that. So with that edge selected, I can shift right click, go to cut, select all UVs, shift right click again, unfold along V. V is up and down, U is horizontal. So that is now unfolded this guy perfectly. We could slap a checker map on there to just double check. And yeah, that's looking really smooth. So we can continue along. Let's do our next one that we've isolated, which is this guy. So it's on the inside. If I added a seam here, it'd be very obvious. So I'm going to add it the exact opposite spot, like up here, where once again, if we're having our camera here, we won't be able to see it. And if we have our camera in the front, we won't be able to see it. So just keep things consistent and try and think of how you're going to render this or how a player will see this while you're going through this. Let's go ahead and cut, unfold V. Once again, it's just holding shift and right click to get to those options. And then we have this outside ring again, which I'm going to keep consistent. Cut here and unfold V. Nice. So there's that. Let's go ahead and move on to the front pieces. So I can select these rings and this. And we can project this from X, because as we can see in our little gizmo on the bottom left, X is the direction we're facing right now, looking at it head on, which is going to give us the most accurate projection for what we're looking for. So this guy right here is pretty fine on his own. The only thing I'd probably check is when you're projecting, sometimes it might be inverted. you can hit this little button here. If it's this blue color, that means it's the correct orientation. If it's a red like this right here, it's going to be inverted. And all you'd have to do is select it, go to modify and flip, and that would just flip it around. So this guy's fine the way he is. He's taking up a lot of space, so I like him to stay that way. These guys are really thin though, and it's really annoying to have to pack in big circles that take up a lot of space and are very awkwardly shaped if they're not really taking up a decent portion of the mesh, which these guys certainly aren't. So let's find a way to sort of better pack these guys in, and to do that I'm just going to be adding in a cut to their geo, and we can kind of straighten this guy out. So there are a couple different ways to do this. I've released another tutorial on my YouTube channel a long time ago about how to UV cables, and it goes over a technique where I can turn this into a straight line. Now, if I'm going to be totally honest, I don't exactly remember how I did that. I will include that tutorial though in the package of links that you guys can go and access, and yeah, go ahead and watch that. It'll probably explain exactly what I'm doing right now, but what it does is you can take a circle like this or a crazy shape, turn it into a perfect grid, and that's a good way to sort of UV things. I have since bought a plugin that just sort of does that automatically, so I can just sort of select all this, and in my multi option I can also select the edge, hit gridify, and it just turns it into a grid for me. This is a plugin by Malcolm, I think it's Malcolm346. If you Google Maya plugins, Malcolm, he'll pop up right away, and this is one of his most popular ones. This is an amazing toolbar for UVing. I think it's like $2 or $3. It'll save you so much time. So either follow that tutorial for free or get this guy. Either way, that's how we're going to be going through and getting these thinner parts into a straight line. And from here I just unfold U. This also is a great option of straighten UV, which is going to straighten everything for us for better bakes. If you don't have that option, what you can do is select edges, or rather select pairs of UVs, go into here and align, and that'll straighten them out. This is just a much faster option, but essentially we've turned our circle into a straight line, and this is going to be much, much easier to pack. It's taking up way less space. Technically it's taking up the same amount of space, but the shape is much easier to work with. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Once again, select the faces, and in multi-mode I can select an edge with it, gridify. It's more or less the principle that I'm trying to explain here. The method is not as important. There's always a million ways to do this stuff. So yeah, like I said, I'll include that video if you guys are curious, but either way that you do it is fine. So that'll take care of those guys. Let's see what's left. We have the back side. This should be relatively easy. Let's go ahead and isolate this again. Select the whole back. We're going to project from X. And as you can see, it's still red since we projected it and it's on the flip side of this. So this was projecting good, but this is the opposite side. That's just going to mean that we're going to have to modify and flip. You can go in there and click this box and adjust if you're flipping horizontal or vertical. Most of the time horizontal is what you're going to go for. I think it defaults to that anyways, but we're going to add that to our pile of finished stuff. So we're going to continue along. But anyways, as you can see, like all these rounded parts, they're one shell. These are soft edges. We're cutting on the hard edges. So it's all coming together. This is how you sort of see it in practice. Let's go ahead and move along. We have this guy. I'm going to treat him the same as everything else. So go into multi-mode, faces and an edge. You can gridify UVs. And unfold U, straighten UVs, And yeah, I do want to make sure you guys can follow along any way possible. So hopefully those sort of alternative methods, if you don't want to be paying for these plugins, works. But the thing is, there is so much to UV. It's just going to be impossible to sort of keep doing this without, I suppose, finding shortcuts or quicker ways to do it. This is such a dense mesh. This example though, I guess this isn't even the best use for that tool. You can just project from Y and simply, yeah, cut it and unfold vertically. That's pretty simple. It's mostly just for these rings here that are super thin. And if we turn on our checker map, we can see even though you've turned a ring essentially into a straight line, the checker is very, very consistent. So that's how we know we're doing a good job. So that's done. We got this guy here. Let's go ahead and project him, or gridify him rather. Grab the faces and an edge. The edge is going to be the seam. Gridify. We can go ahead and straighten those UVs. Such a time saver though. For $2, like, you're going to be saving yourself for a model like this, like, realistically hours of work. So it's kind of a no-brainer to pick something like this up. Let's go ahead and grab the inside here, give it a very similar treatment to the outside where we project from Y. Find an edge that's very hidden, like this one. Cut it. Unfold V. Straighten UVs. Add it to the pile. Okay. We have this shell here now. If you hold right click in the UV editor, you get some different options. UV shell is a good one for selecting shells, and it carries over to the 3D viewport. So we can just select this shell here. We can reproject it facing X. This is looking pretty spot on already, so I'm not going to have to do anything to that. Then we have these sort of three pegs sticking out. Let's just go ahead and project those all from Y. Pretty simple. We're just going to add some cuts where you probably won't be able to see them. So just anywhere on the inside where it's kind of tucked away from the camera. You can shift right click cut, unfold V, and that's those guys. They should already be perfectly straight. And then that just leaves this sort of nose piece. Oh, I suppose we didn't actually project this one yet. Let's go ahead and, yep, like so. These guys are a bit thicker, so I don't mind not cutting it and straightening it. I think it's totally fine for these sort of chunkier ones. It's just these thin ones I want to turn into these strips so they're not taking up as much space. Let's go ahead and grab the inside of this, project it by X. Seems that these little triangles for some reason are, yeah, they're their own UV islands. I can go ahead and flip. This one is going to be a good example of why we have to straighten things out. So let's go ahead and project this guy from Y. Find our sort of cut spot, which is about here. Cut. Unfold V, unfold U, and you're going to see it's a little crinkly because it's tapered in. This side is smaller than this side, so it's going to give us this little wobble, and this isn't very good for baking. So if we straighten our UVs, and once again you can use these align tools, technically now this isn't perfect, but if we check our checker map and we let's just like make the checker super big. There's a little bit of swimming or like distortion or whatever you'd like to call it, but it's so minimal, and it's at the cost of, well, essentially we're going to have a good bake. We're going to have a good bake, and the cost of that is going to be our actual texture that we're using, our painted metal or whatever it is going to have the tiniest, minuscule warping that nobody would ever even notice, and it probably looks natural anyways. So these kind of trade-offs are fine. It's okay to straighten your UVs in this sense. By all means do it. And there's some pretty extreme examples of what you can do with it as well. Just before I finish this, let's just take a really quick peek at this guy, wherever his UVs ended up. So it's purple right now because I inverted this, and I didn't invert this. So this is red, this is blue. When they're on top, they're purple. The UVs are stacked. But the example I wanted to bring up is this guy. He's completely straight, even though this is a pretty intense curve here. So keep that in mind. It's going to help with your baking a lot down the line. Definitely something to keep note of. But why don't we go ahead and finish this off. I think this is the last piece, just on the nose here. Project it from X. And yeah, that should be it. So these guys are done correctly. The only thing to keep in mind at this point is we have to have them share the correct textile density. Now, what does that exactly mean? We can sort of view this guy, and we see that these checkers are a lot bigger than these checkers, are a lot smaller. These checkers are huge, these ones are tiny. Essentially, all we want to do is make sure that they're all roughly the same checker size. The reason that is that's kind of just saying that how much room does each part or each polygon essentially get on the texture sheet. There's a lot of checkers on this, which means there's a lot more pixels on this area than, say, something like this. There's a lot less pixels per centimeter than this area. This is great if you have a really high detail area like our keycaps, for example, where they're going to have a lot of letters on those. We're going to want them to have a bit more detail because they need to be like crisp and clear, and we need to make sure that you can actually read what's on there. But say like the bottom of the legs or something doesn't have to be as clear, but in general you want everything to be pretty much the exact same textile density. So you can go in here and you can sort of automatically adjust these. If I shrink this, it'll be more accurate with this. Now this is where I'm going to be a little bit tested. There are actual tools in here to sort of keep everything the same size. I think, if I'm not mistaken, if you go to UVs and you go to modify, there's got to be a better way than this. But if you go to layout and shell pre-scaling off, I'm pretty sure it'll automatically set them to the correct, like have them be even with each other. Now what this is doing is essentially, this is kind of our final step when we're doing our UVs, but it's going to be packing this all into the 1-to-1 UV space here. Packing it in as tightly as possible. It's really, really helpful. But yeah, okay, as we can see, it's done a pretty decent job of kind of averaging everything out. There are other tools in Maya, but if I were to be totally honest, I've never used them before. This guy, though, has been super helpful for it. So what you can do is copy textile density and then paste textile density. So now everything is the exact same. So once again, if you don't have this tool, you don't have to use it. You could just sort of go in here and go to modify, layout, and I encourage you to Google other options like how to fix textile density in Maya, how to keep textile density consistent, shell sizes, stuff like that. There are options. I know I've seen them. I've just never personally used them. I've always relied on this guy, but it does seem like the layout option at least gets you most of the way there. And if you're doing piece by piece, it takes like 10 seconds. It's not going to take that long. But yeah, essentially, that's how I do this. I want to see now if I go to layout, if it's going to keep the ratios relatively good. If not, I would highly encourage just looking up a different method for it. But anyways, that's going to be one piece UV'd, another piece done. And with that, I think that'll be the last piece that I do a demonstration on. This is, yeah, okay, so those are all consistent now. So it doesn't seem like it does a super good job of doing it on its own, but I'm sure if you laid out a few times, it would take care of that for you. What I want to do in the meantime is for each piece that you do, just sort of shrink it and send it off somewhere far away where it's not going to overlap with something, and do what we just did to every single piece. The rest of this model, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to do it off camera. It's just going to take too long if I'm balancing everything on one screen and trying to explain it. We're going to get really repetitive really quickly. So I'm going to do it off screen, but keep each little part, like this is like one part. So keep all the shells for one part together, spread them out a little bit so you're not overlapping anything. And then in the next part, the next video, I'm going to show what exactly we can do when we have all of our stuff UV'd and laid out, how we're going to fit it into the one-to-one space, how we want to break up our UVs. I'm thinking for this to have actually two texture sets, one for things with type on it and one for things that don't have type. I'm still ironing that out, so I'll probably explain it better in the next video. But between now and the next video, all I'm going to be doing is exactly what we did here, but for everything else. I'm not going to go any further than that, so don't worry about that. We're going to be finishing off the UVs together. Just go through every single piece and yeah, pretty much go ahead and take what you have and sort of lay it out a little bit better. Cut the edges whenever there's a 90-degree angle. Be sure to soften your edges in the correct places. What's really useful for us though is we have pretty much already cut up our shells based on our hard edges, and it's not one-to-one with a 90-degree angle, but for the most part it's pretty close. So a lot of our UVs, just from how we sent it over to ZBrush, have gotten us most of the way there. So it shouldn't take too long. That being said, UVs do typically take more time than you'd expect. It's not the most exciting thing in the world, but yeah, hopefully you guys learned something from this. I thought I'd do a bit more of an actual lesson style video. Yeah, we'll pick up in the next part with a really nice way of how we can lay everything out into a one-to-one space. And then from there, we're on to baking. So it's not going to be too much longer until we're officially starting the texturing phase of everything. So yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next part when we're actually diving into packing our UVs. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you learned something, and I'll catch you in that next part. See ya.